Dealing with your inner critic or that negative voice inside your head can feel like a daunting and difficult task. So in this video, I'm going to share with you the psychology of the good, the bad, and the ugly of that inner critic that you feel or that negative voice inside your head, as well as give you a 5-step therapeutic art activity or process that you can do today, right now. That way you can get a handle on that inner critic and that negative voice inside your head. Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. I am Desiree. I'm currently a psychology graduate student with a focus on therapeutic arts. We do go a little bit meta on this channel, but if you are interested in topics like these, such as self-help or personal development in creative ways, then I invite you to subscribe to this channel so you don't miss out on any of the new videos or upcoming videos that are coming up. Let's get into this inner critic and this negative voice that a lot of people struggle with. I know it's something that I struggled with. I made videos before on the topic, but I feel like right now I wanted to kind of give you something that was practical, manageable, and a step-by-step guide that you can do today to help you navigate or to better understand your inner critic.
I don't know why I'm so critical of myself.
What is an inner critic and where did it come from? The inner critic is that nagging voice that loves to point out all of your mistakes, your embarrassing moments, and it makes you second guess everything, even when you're doing just fine. You can picture the inner critic as the world's most pessimistic sidekick, and it's always assuming the worst. But here's the thing, it's usually wrong. In short, essentially, the formation of your inner critic and your self-negative voice most likely formed early on in childhood by being around people that either criticized you a lot, put expectations on you a lot, or just made you think or question your self-worth. So now let's talk about the good of having an inner critic, because sometimes having an inner critic or a healthy inner critic can be a really good thing because it gives you a sense of discernment and judgment about yourself, and it may highlight or bring some awareness on things that you may need to change. The goodness of having an inner critic is that it can bring about awareness to maybe certain detrimental behaviors or thought processes that need to ultimately be changed. So the bad that's associated with having an inner critic is whenever that inner critic turns negative. And this happens a lot in so many people is they when they're dealing with their inner critic, they're dealing with this negative self-talk, right? If you have an inner critic, you know you probably say some really hard and hurtful things that you say to yourself that you probably wouldn't even say to anybody else. And that's not good because whenever you start to feed yourself these negative self-talk or these negative narratives, they can turn into beliefs. These beliefs can influence our thoughts, they can influence our behaviors, and ultimately that's going to be reflective with our life. Whenever we're talking about the ugly of having an inner critic and that negative self-voice is whenever we use it as a form of like self-punishment, when we use it as a form of guilt, when we use it to overly criticize ourselves, judge ourselves, devalue our actions, it devalues our self-worth. Okay, so now let's get into the fun and the therapeutic art part of this video. Really quick, I do want to give a shout out to Struthless, who is an Australian YouTuber. I came across this idea that he mentioned in one of his videos from whenever he was in therapy from his therapist, and I added a little bit of a twist onto it, but I felt that I don't know, I just want to give credit where credit is due. Now, the materials that you need for this exercise are just basic and simple, just something to write with and something to write on. So if you have a journal that you routinely write in, I would suggest that. You can be as creative with this process, or you can just kind of keep it as a simple journaling exercise. It is completely up to you. This is not about skill. This is not about creating some magical artwork, okay? This is just an exercise to help you get into the mental framework of what to do whenever that inner critic comes up inside your mind. So the first step is you need to catch your inner critic in action. When it rears its ugly head, I want you to catch it in a net. That's going to be the first step. I just want you to catch it in a net and put your attention on it. Now you're going to move on to step 2, and you're going to place that inner critic in a jar. This step is important because it's helping you to mentally separate yourself from your inner critic. And it helps you to see that these thoughts that this inner critic is telling you are not necessarily facts. Step 3 is to just shut up and listen to the inner critic. Just let it have its word. Let it say whatever it needs to say. And all you're going to do is to sit there and listen. In your journal or your notebook, you can write down everything the inner critic is saying. If you wanted to be artistic with it, you can draw your inner critic and have a dialogue with your inner critic. What this step is helping you to do is to listen and to understand what's actually bothering you and what or why your inner critic is acting up. So if you were to isolate your inner critic and you would give it attention and put your awareness upon it, you can go deep to understand maybe that this inner critic is not really your voice. Maybe it's your parents' voice. Maybe it's your ex-lover's voice. Maybe it's a coach's voice or somebody that was like negative and critical about you. And it's not necessarily something that is true. It's just something that maybe you believed because of your early circumstances. But you're never going to get any of that information unless you're willing to actually shut up and listen to your inner critic. So that's why step 3 is important. So now whenever we move to step 4, and you've listened to everything that the inner critic and that negative voice had to say, you were non-judgmental, you didn't identify with it. Well, now is going to be the time to accept it, reject it, challenge it, or change it. A lot of times whenever you're working within therapy, what we do is we challenge those negative voices, and we challenge those negative voices or those negative beliefs with something called CBT or cognitive behavioral therapy. But really what it is it's changing some of those negative thoughts and those beliefs into positive ones. And the way that this is done is by looking for evidence that is true or not true. So let's just say your negative voice is telling you something that like you're worthless. Well, what we would do is we would work with some of the contrary evidence that says you're not worthless. So we would look at your accomplishments. We would look at the things that you have achieved in your life, right? We would just kind of shift that focus away from from focusing on some of these negative things to positive things because they are there. And this is what is so great about working with a coach or a therapist is that we can listen to you and identify those things. But for you doing this on your own, you don't really want to give this negative voice any power or more power than it necessarily needs. And also within step 4, because you're accepting what the inner critic is saying or you're rejecting it or you're challenging it, in order to effectively do this, you're going to have some level of self-compassion. So this is whenever self-compassion becomes extremely important when you're dealing with your inner critic. So don't feel bad if you have to repeat steps or the steps for you may be out of order. This is just a general guideline to help you understand what to do with these negative inner critics, these negative thoughts, and how to work with them. So the 5th and final step within this process is to release your inner critic. You can let it go out of the jar. You listen to what it says. You already know how you're going to deal with it and how you're going to handle it. But you're also going to keep going. So it's very rare that you release your inner critic and it doesn't pop back up into your life. And when it does pop back up into your life, you're just going to repeat the same steps from 1 to 5 again. So just a recap of this 5-step process is to 1, catch your inner critic when it comes up. You're going to isolate your inner critic, so you're going to put it in a jar. You are going to shut up and you're going to listen to the inner critic, so you're just going to let the inner critic say whatever it has to do. And then on step 4, then you are going to decide whether you want to accept it, reject it, challenge it, or change it. And then step 5, you're going to release it and then understand that if this inner critic or this voice comes up again, you're going to repeat the steps until you have effectively learned to manage that negative voice inside your head and what it is telling you. If you found value in this video, I would greatly appreciate it. A big fat thumbs up. It really does help the YouTube algorithm. And if you are interested in more art therapeutic resources, especially from like a shadow work perspective, if you're into that, then be sure to watch this popular video here where I talk about Jungian art therapy and the symbology behind art. Can't speak. Anyway, that's all I have for you, and I'll see you in the next video.